So as we go through the 7th chapter of Ketubot, we get into questions where a woman can be divorced without receiving her ketubah. In other words, she can be divorced but financially ruined. The 6th Mishnah looked at questions of behavior. And the 7th and 8th Mishnah are now going to relate to other questions around we'll see. We'll see. So someone betrothed a woman on condition that she wasn't under any vows. So, for example, let's say she'd taken a vow that, I don't know, she wouldn't drink good wine or red meat. And this was something that he really enjoyed doing with her. He might feel aggrieved. And he might have betrothed her on condition that she didn't have vows. And the Mishnah in Kiddushin, the 3rd chapter, which we'll look at presently, goes through a whole range of conditions which might exist around a betrothal. And in the time of the Mishnah, a betrothal was very often subject to conditions. And if the conditions weren't met, the betrothal is invalid. And that means, by the way, that she can be released without a get. Normally, to break a betrothal, you need a divorce document, you need a get. But if the conditions are not met, you don't need a get. So someone betrothed a woman on condition she didn't have vows. And she was found to be under vows. She's not makudeshet. She's not betrothed. She doesn't need a get. Nothing has happened. The act has got no legal stamp. What if he actually married? Knasa stam. He actually married her. And the word stam means, well, sort of ordinarily, but from the context here, it means unconditional. In other words, he married her just without making any conditions. And then he found that she was under vows. And this is assumed to be essentially the breaking of an implicit condition. And so the Mishnah rules, she can be divorced without her ketubah. Actually, the marriage is reversed. What if he made a condition that she didn't have physical blemishes? Almanat she'ein ba mumin. He betroths her on condition she doesn't have mumin. Mumin are, well, we'll find out what mumin, the Mishnah will ask what a mum is. I've translated here as a blemish. So he betroths her on condition she's got no blemishes. And she is found to have blemishes. It's a carbon copy of the first half of the Mishnah. She's not betrothed. Nothing's happened. The condition isn't fulfilled. It's got no legal stamp. If he married her unconditionally, he married her without conditions. And she's found her. In fact, she goes out. She's divorced without a ketubah. And the Mishnah adds, Shekol hamumin poslin bakohanim ufoslin banashim. All defects which disqualify priests also disqualify women. And this is really interesting. We're going to see elsewhere that there's a parallel between the priesthood and marriage. And here was the Mishnah drawing it out explicitly. Now, what are these defects that the Mishnah is talking about? Well, there's a verse in the parasha of Emor. The Lord spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to Aaron, whoever is of your seed that has any mum, that has a blemish, he can't approach to offer the bread of his God. In other words, he can't serve at the altar. He can eat the holy things, but he can't serve at the altar. And we consider this now very problematic. And why can't a blemished priest serve at the altar? And the assumption, I think, of the Rambam is that this is a social issue of its time. And so maybe we would apply the same, by the way, to judgments about marriage. But be that as it may, the verse then goes on to articulate this list of blemishes. Ki chol ish asher bo mum lo yikra. For any man that has a mum, it's the same word as in our Mishnah, a blemish. Lo yikra, shall not approach. That means he doesn't approach to serve at the altar. And now's the list. Someone, a blind man or a lame one, or someone that's got the flat nose, or someone that has a broken foot, or a broken hand, or is crook-backed, or crooked-handed, or a dwarf, or has a blemish in his eye, or is scurvy or scabbed, or whose testes are crushed. All of these cannot serve the altar. And some of these are specifically male issues, of course, but the Mishnah seems to be saying, look, the same list applies to women who are, the same applies to women. So the Mishnah then goes on, well, hang on, when were these discovered? She had bodily defects while she was still in her father's house. The father has to produce proof that she had these defects after she was betrothed. And his field was flooded, i.e., when the betrothal was made, she didn't have these defects. They happened afterwards. His field was flooded. It's an accident. He's now responsible because he's betrothed her. Incidentally, I might presume, by the way, that if he was aware of these defects, then of course he can no longer make a complaint. And we'll find out about this later in the Mishnah. This is not to say that a woman with blemishes is unmarriageable, but we need it seems, according to the Mishnah, that we need transparency. But let's make our way gradually through the Mishnah. So if she had these defects while in her father's house, the father has to produce proof that they happened after she was betrothed. I guess the assumption is that if she has these while she's in her father's house, the core assumption must be that she had them before betrothal, and the father, notice the father is taking care of the economic conditions of the marriage here. So it's assumed that presumption is she's young, or she doesn't have anyway, the father has agency. The father has to bring proof that they happened after the betrothal. She comes into her husband's domain. Notice this Mishnah is almost a mirror image in its form of the previous ones that we've looked at, the previous one, which begin with betrothal and then go on to marriage. So again, we're beginning with betrothal and we're going on to marriage. She came into her husband's domain. If she came into her husband's domain, now the burden of proof is the other way round. The husband has to produce proof that these defects existed before she'd been betrothed. And that means his bargain was made in error. Divrei Rabbi Meir. A mekach is an acquisition. Maybe it shouldn't be translated as bargain. Is an acquisition that's made without full knowledge, has no legal standing. It's mekach ta'ut is an acquisition that's made, if you like, without full knowledge. It has no standing. So that means that he can divorce her without her ketubah. But the sages are going to push back. The sages say, to what does this apply? This applies to concealed defects. Aval. As far as defects which are exposed, he cannot make any claim. In other words, if he knows about these, he can't make a claim. And the Mishnah goes on, if there was a bathhouse in that town, Af b'mumin shebaseter eino yachol liton. If there's a bathhouse in town, he can't make any claim even about concealed defects. Mipnei shehu bodek b'yad krovotav. Because he's assumed to check up, to examine via his relatives. Presuming this is krovotav, by the way, the Mishnah makes it clear, these are his female relatives. So it is assumed in a town with a shared bathhouse that kind of everybody knows more or less about everybody else. And a man cannot claim ignorance if he marries a woman and finds, she's lame, for example, after the event.